Hey, what it did, y'all? Let's get right into it. Legacy of Phrecia event is right around the corner at this point, which means that every ascendancy has been announced. And I figured there was no better way to celebrate than to make a tier list. Hooray! Okay, seriously, I actually hate the idea of making a tier list. Just feels too matter of factish. And I had to figure out how I was actually gonna sort these ascendancies and whatnot, especially with very little actual calculations to work off of. But I made it happen, right? I've gone for something sort of like a bubble sort, if you're familiar with that type of sorting algorithm from programming, just head to heading ascendancies until I felt like they were in the right position, roughly speaking. It's also pre-divided into 4 categories: bad, okay, good, and insane, which you'll hear more about that later. And it's roughly akin to just like a C, B, A, and S tier, but I just had it divided with more descriptive names in my own work because I was struggling to keep my thoughts in order. Just gotta be honest. And as you go through, you'll hear me elaborate on both the tiering, but also my thoughts on the ascendancies themselves. Anyways, it's a lot of yapping. Enjoy the tier list. Bonus points if you give me feedback down below that tells me why I'm wrong. Let's get into it. First things we got to do is get started with the trash. Got to take the trash out and then we can have fun, right? It's just like eating your vegetables. Now, jokes aside, these ascendancies are not entirely unplayable, but I do not really recommend them unless you have a serious desire to do the specific thing that it allows you to do, right? Like every one of these ascendancies has a specific role that it can play somewhat, and pretty much nothing else to it is what it is. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, I'm going from bottom of my list to the top of my list. It is entirely ordered through the video. Let's go. At the bottom of the totem pole, we have polytheist. There's a number of different things that can be pointed to for why this ascendancy would be get labeled as the worst. But I'm going to point the finger mainly at the wildly disjointed identity of this ascendancy. Lunaris and Yugal are focused around spells, but then you have Gruffcold just there to disable them. Which, by the way, Gruffcold is horrific considering just how many skills that you aren't thinking are categorized as spells are actually categorized that way. It's not the first time this complaint comes up, but it's worth noting here just a little bit because unlike the other time this will come up in this video, you don't get much in return for it. So at least it's optional, right? I guess that's something. Now, back to this identity crisis. Evasion and blind on a Templar after Grace has been nerfed? Yeah, I don't know about that. I can nitpick here for a little too long, so instead, I'm just gonna wrap this out by saying this ascendancy has nodes that are good in isolation, right? Ralakesh is okay for a lot of builds at the very minimum. Solaris, Abrath if you're in leveling, Brine King has some really cool implementations with melding of the flesh. But most of what it does is not actually game changing or powerful enough to actually matter. But if you came here wondering what I would suggest you to play on this ascendancy, Pyroclast Mines if you're a spell build so you can utilize the Astral Projector effect in the back, or Lightning Staff on a strike. Lightning Staff on a strike, yeah, Lightning Strike on a staff if you want to play an attack build. Do with that what you will. Now, of all the reasons that I'm going to put Harbinger at 18, the first reason has to be that this is absolute overkill on theming versus functionality, right? Like, surely we could have gotten one word somewhere in there in a language that's speakable by us so that we can identify them by, as opposed to just assigning names to the Harbingers as we see fit. Dumb nitpick, but it bothers me a little bit. Not for things that I actually mean to say, which is that this ascendancy is based on old strong effects. Emphasis on old. For example, Greater Harbinger of Time was once upon a time 20% action speed for the allies of the Harbinger. This was nerfed down to 10% following the Syndicate Operatives era of the game, right? Like the 314 to 316 stretch. That's when it got nerfed down. And that nerf just makes it not really the quality that we should be expecting of a 4-pointer. Not when Wildspeaker gets 8% and Conduit on one of its 2-pointers. Not when Deadeye, not in the event, obviously, but just not when Deadeye gets 8% that ramps up to 20%. It's just not good enough. On the note of effects that are no longer as potent as they used to be, Greater Harbinger of the Arcane, as Arcane Surge is a shell of itself. 9% more spell damage actually got shifted out of Arcane Surge and into Hierophant, right? So all it gives is cast speed and regen, I guess, for mana. This Harbinger also does technically give you a Lightning Pen buff of 10%, but that with a very heavily neutered Arcane Surge is also just not 4-pointer quality. And that's not even addressing the fact that the 2-pointer that it's put behind is incredibly niche. Like, painfully niche. And that point about it being really niche just extends to a lot of this Ascendancy as a whole. For certain builds, this is the Ascendancy of its dreams. I'm just going to be honest with you, right? Like, there are some nodes in here that are incredible for very specific builds. And the power level of this Ascendancy is entirely dependent on this statement. For what it's worth, I actually think this makes it a really well-designed Ascendancy because it mostly just brings together effects that you wouldn't really be able to get much access to elsewhere, such as CDR, Hex Area of Effect, or the channeling stuff from Greater Harbinger of Will. So, with this in mind, I actually do have a recommendation for you if you really want to play Harbinger, because I'm going to be real with you. I want to play Harbinger, so I have an idea for this. Impending Doom. I'd probably only really play it as a crit build because we don't really have poison support in this Ascendancy. And like we're a witch, so we're very well positioned to go crit anyways with like charge stacking and whatnot. And the major reason why this is so important within Harbinger specifically is that Harbinger actually provides 100% ink AoE for hex skills, which is one of the ways to work around the bug fix that occurred to Spell Cascade's interaction with Vixen's Entrapment a couple of leagues ago. Also, there's 40% CDR, which makes it easier to hit breakpoints or potentially even sends us into new breakpoints. So some investigation to be done there. Coming in at number 17, we have the other Ascendancy who thinks it's a good idea to just disable your spells. Except, Polytheist with Grovkul does it optionally. You will click Rampager when you play Behemoth. This means that now instead of asking whether or not if we want to click it, we have to ask whether or not this Ascendancy gives us enough tools to justify the loss of access to spells. Now, before I answer this question, I just need to tell you how many things are actually spells, in case you've never really thought about this. You ever level a Marauder and you do some Leaf Slam Frost Blinking and then you keep that going forward? Well, remember, Frost Blink is a spell. Gone. Oh, you really need some auras for more damage? You want to put Pride on your character? Gone. Oh, you need Determination? Gone. You want a Herald of Ash? Gone. You've got all this rage from the Ascendancy that you want to use? Nice Berserk, bozo. You want to use Molten Shell because you've got a ton of armor? Fun fact, that's also a spell, bozo. Blood Rage? You want Frenzy Charge Generation and attack speed? Pfft. Unfortunately for you, that's a spell. So, way too many of our buttons nowadays are spells, even if you aren't actually pressing them and you're just triggering them. And quite frankly, this type of design was probably cooked up from the old days, back when aura and buff scaling hadn't really like dominated the game, right? There's a notable period in time where they really went overboard with sending aura scaling and whatnot to the moon. So before then, probably was a cool idea. Or honestly, even just back in the day when like the most defensiveness you needed on your bar was like a cast and damage take in Immortal Call. However, if you really want to deal with these downsides, I do think the upsides are extremely sweet. I even had this Ascendancy really high on my list before I realized that you just lose access to so many multipliers. That said, I have two recommendations for you, right? One is to play with some friends in a party because it says that your spell skills are disabled. It does not mean that spell skills have no effect on you, and therefore a support can provide you with all of those auras that I mentioned earlier, and you will still go absolutely crazy. Number two is to actually play pretty much any melee skill you want, because I feel like Rampager, Fortify, and the Sheer Fury nodes will support pretty much any build pretty well. You can probably try things like LS because it's the most generic option right now, but I've been looking into Cleave of Rage and Rage Vortex of Berserking. I'm not telling you to do it. Like I said, this is in the bad category. I can't recommend this. But if you really want to, hey, check it out, right? Or a really funny niche option would be something like Bloodthirst support used on Reaver for Fraction. So you can use like Final Blow for the crit chance, but you can't use Pet Blood. So good luck with that. Up next, we have another Ascendancy that definitely falls into the Polytheist bucket, but I'm rating it at 16 because I feel like the effects are at least stronger and more build defining. This is, of course, Daughter of Ashavi. It's full of nodes that are very valuable in isolation, and they create a really strange puzzle that it has a lot of conditionals, but put together, it actually becomes worthwhile. Spell slinging, for example, is really strong if you play a spell slinger character, except it's behind Illuminating Wisp that has no real synergy with spell slinging besides them both using the use of a wand attack. But Illuminating Wisp is also really good. Forest tracking is really good, and it's put behind Oath of the Magi to, take you back to the days of Affliction League a little bit. Or Roots of the Grove, which take Inextricable Fate and put it in your Ascendancy, which is extremely strong. And there's also the Shrine package, which also has some potential value. So this ranking, I just named a bunch of insane effects. It's because even though the value of these effects is really high, it's really conditional on a bunch of like medium or underperforming parts of the game, except for one particular use case, which is going to bring me to my recommendation: Poison Wanding. Most likely kinetic bolt of fragmentation. I know you probably want to play like kinetic blast, and you're free to do that, but in terms of the one that will actually give you the most damage, kinetic bolt of fragmentation is going to do so, and you just really get to abuse Roots of the Grove with its insane hit count and so on and so forth. Right, alongside then Illuminating Wisp, making Sacred Wisp just the best support in the game outside of things like Minefield support. Done some ads for that on the channel previously. Now, this might be a little controversial, but I need you to hear me out here, okay? On the surface, I feel like Architect of Chaos is full of insanely strong effects. Effects that we've probably bricked our builds for in the past, if I'm being real. Or at least built them around. But when I look at it, I'm seeing Ascendancy nodes that are not actually all that strong until the whole puzzle comes together. And that's why I haven't rated so low. I think once the pieces of the puzzle are together, we're going to see some of the most Path of Exile-esque builds you've ever seen. But I think the Ascendancy is horrific until then. That said, I've recommended for worse. Like, you got a Polytheist recommendation out of me. So I definitely have one here for you. And I've been eyeing up, and I heard that Dan was also eyeing this up. Vol Cold Snap. I'm going to add to that, I think, Vol RF for the same reason, Vol Righteous Fire. The idea being to play the Ascendancy earlier, you kind of need to be able to use Shepherd of Souls, which gives you uptime in the force of reducing the soul cost such that you can use the skill more often. And so all we really need to do is to not ratchet the cost too high by keeping our use counts per 8 seconds low, thinking skill with huge durations. That's how you end up with Vol Cold Snap, Vol Righteous Fire. Now, on the high end, I'm thinking this Ascendancy goes crazy with like a 9+ link dagger and a squire with the dagger enchant that just removes soul gain prevention duration. Like, I feel like you could get something ridiculous going with that. You know what I mean? All right. We've made it out of the Ascendancies I straight up just don't really recommend people to play. Now we're at things that I can at least somewhat recommend, even if it's not emphatic or particularly happy about it. These Ascendancies are definitely functional and will provide you with a cool and unique experience, even if they can be outclassed. And Herald is a great Ascendancy to talk about first after talking about being outclassed just a little bit, right? So it's a strange Ascendancy to look at, because the thing that appeals to most people is not what I think this Ascendancy is actually good for at all. This ascendancy is designed entirely with the coming calamity in mind, both the actual unique item, but more importantly, the first 2-pointer in the ascendancy that we're required to take, which gives us a lot of reservation efficiency for our herald skills, but takes away our auras. Actually allowing us to support our herald skills. Now, this is not the first time that herald characters have had their auras taken away from them, so we're not panicking over that. But looking at the actual effects for each herald and all the herald related nodes, you'll quickly break this down into 2 categories: the elemental player damage ones and the minion heralds. And unfortunately, this divide is how you're going to tell which heralds are actually probably going to be good and the ones that are going to suck with this ascendancy. So the important thing to remember is that this ascendancy isn't necessarily really designed with you using heralds as a buff engine in mind. It's more so that they are the damage. You are playing a herald character, not herald, but herald. You know what I mean? So under that vein, future fear, future anguish, and future regret are just wastes of nodes because they offer a little bit of max rest for a melding setup potentially, but really they're just buff effect for things that don't actually affect their own damage. So not all that impressed with that. Now, future guilt and nostalgia, though, are character buffs that give you much better, offensive or rather defensive benefits. And again, the buff effect is kind of irrelevant except for nostalgia is giving you poison chance, which is relevant to how you actually upkeep your virulence. Now, when you look to the right of the future 5, you'll notice that, these nodes are actually all pretty good over there. And then you look to the left and you see a damnation, which makes you cry a little bit because you missed the old days when that item wasn't nerfed, and a note that is honestly terrible. So I'm not even going to bother giving it its name. Ultimately, this ascendancy comes down to 2 use cases: Herald Autobombers and Summoners through either one of the other Heralds. So starting with the Autobomber, I'm actually not very high on the concept, but it's because I think they just kind of ruined it by also showing a Surfcaster. The idea of a Herald Bomber is that it's a Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice character, and I feel like 5% base crit and access to +3 levels is just not enough compared to an ascendancy that just guarantees it to crit or allows your Herald of Ice to shock, which is terrifying to think about, right? And converts your Herald of Thunder so it can freeze. You see what I'm getting at here? It's just not there. Now, as far as the minions go, yes. They are why this ascendancy is in okay and not in bad, because I think those nodes are actually good. I think that if you like the playstyle of, either down below plus Herald of Purity or just a good old Hoak character, this is definitely the right ascendancy for that. The choice between Damnation and Apocalypse, by the way, it will seem like a hard one because it's, +3 levels, but also such a great defensive layer. Unless you have no Chaos Res, take Damnation. And if you have no Chaos Res, get Chaos Res so you can switch Apocalypse to Damnation. Trust me, it's so good. One last funny suggestion for the minion heralds, by the way: try combining them. I have no idea if this is actually better than just, full investing in one or the other, but the fact that you have so much reservation efficiency in the Ascendancy and the fact that the Nerd Scourge actually gives buffs to both of them simultaneously, it makes me wonder if there's a little something there. You know what I mean? It could be awesome. I don't know. So, you know how they say 99% of gamblers stop before they hit it big? This ascendancy might have been a part of that 99%. I feel like the concept of gambling is fire, but the payouts just aren't there. Gambling for no reason, y'all. Don't do that. If you're going to gamble, at least make it useful. All right, I got to correct myself real quick. Do not gamble, but you get what I mean. Now, that said, I need to make it very clear that every node in this ascendancy is a net improvement to your character on average. It's just that the improvement amounts are not flashy or interesting, so as to actually make you happy with the fact that you're gambling. For example, Growing Accumulator worked out to be a 16.6% damage increase on average, only for hits. You can't do anything with ailments with it because ailments are unaffected by double or triple damage. Spectacular Parlay, however, takes a bit more work to get the average value of, but I'm going to simply convey it to you. Walk with me. First off, we need to understand the keyword lucky, which, if you're familiar with D&D or Baldur's Gate 3, you're familiar with the term advantage. Same idea. Roll twice, take the best result. And so That means that it's mostly a curve at how much value it is, but we'll get to that later. Effective critical strike chance of anything under the lucky effect is calculated by seeing how hard it is to fail twice back to back, right? That formula is on the screen if you want to calculate that yourself. Before I can go further, I also need to explain what effective crit value is, because it's not actually a standard term, but it's a term that I'm going to use to convey a basic concept to you for like how this type of damage math is calculated, especially by say like POB, for example, if you wanted to like shorthand it. This is the average effect of on your damage that crit stat investment has. We're using a basic version of this, so it's only going to be using our crit chance and crit damage. That's basically, we're not going to utilize any effects that only take effect during crits or non-crits. That's a lot of complexity that's unnecessary for this explanation. So you just get this by taking our crit chance and our crit multi, multiplying them together, and then adding 1 minus our crit chance to that value. This creates a weighted average between crits and non-crits. Now, with all that explained, here's a table. These are crit values, assuming your character has 300 crit multi, and you click this node. 300 crit multi, by the way, is 150% over the base crit multi of a character, which you get just by putting increased crit damage report on your character, basically. It's a little bit beyond 2123, but you get what I mean. Now, focus on that right column. It tells us how much damage we gain just from having clicked the crit chances lucky node, right? And you'll see that a lot of the extra value really kicks in between 20 and 50% crit. Keep that in mind. Now, look at this other table, 700% crit multi this time, a much more geared out character. And if you look at that 20 to 40% crit range, you'll notice that the percent more damage is over 40% now instead of 25%, right? Instead of 25%. The quick takeaway from these charts is that you can dump your crit stat in favor of crit multi this way. Now I need to show you the downside. So let's very quickly talk about unlucky damage that I will not get too deep with because that math is extremely annoying. The wiki has a write-up for this if you want to like go deeper in detail of it, but right now we're going to focus on specifically this bit that talks about it being the sum of the minimum times 2 times or plus 2 times the maximum over 3. That's for lucky. So for unlucky, instead of 2 times the max, it's 2 times the min. Here's another chart, right? I applied this formula to a series of 5 spells, using spells only because they gave me flat damage numbers to work with instead of trying to think about like the way an attack build will look, even though this is a duelist and will likely end up being an attack build. You understand, right? Now, looking at this table, you'll see that you only really lose 6.6%, 6.7% of your damage on everything except for lightning damage. And that's because just like with damage is lucky, lightning damage's extreme variance comes into play because it has a wide range. Rolling twice means you're more likely to low roll. That's terrifying. We don't want that. So where do we take all this information to, right? Quick calcs up on the screen to show you at 30% crit chance and 300 multi versus 30 crit chance and 700 multi, how much damage you gain, 17% and 35% respectively. This math does assume that you are not utilizing a large amount of lightning damage, specifically base or added lightning damage, as you can convert through lightning just fine because that damage is say fizz and therefore it has fizz damage ranges even when it's in lightning. But if you have like added lightning damage, it's going to be affected very adversely by the unlucky effect. That's a lot of words for me to just say. This node is actually very strong. It allows you to really lean into crit multi-scaling instead of actually having to scale your crit chance all that high, and do not utilize a lot of flat lightning with it. Also, cool synergy, Marylene's fallacy. Could be a cool idea, right? Risky exploit is a hefty res penalty for you to work through, but you do get 50% chance to effectively have 60% elemental damage resistance, assuming you are 75 max res. But it's less than that if you have max res investment, and it can also be considered more than that if you are like exposed or cursed. Does not work on penetration though. Reversed odds is just more of a really good stat, right? It's from our elemental masteries, just 50% chance to the 25% chance. We love that shit. Same thought for risk aversion. It's just stats that we already know and love in a nice quantity in the ascendancy, and the only super consistent part of the ascendancy. You can take the logic that we just worked out for unlucky to talk about how you should feel about overly confident, and if you actually want to build around having 7% DR against most attacks, or, you know, massively screwing over like Shrivan or Eater or any other sources of lightning damage, right? And if you're thinking, but what about heads or tails? Svalid. Next question. All right. So, how could all the numbers and everything about the ascendancy be good, and all I have this in is just okay? One, my standards are high. I'm just going to be real. Two, there's no wow factor here, right? You need to be compelled by the ascendancy you want to play. Like, it's just a part of the fun of the game, right? You want your ascendancy to feel like it actually does more than just exist in the background. And three, most importantly, I struggle to recommend to you to play something that is wildly inconsistent in its output, especially when it pertains to defenses. Offensive inconsistency is something that we're used to as long as we're not playing big nuke builds, but defensive inconsistency is just rough to talk about because it means that you have to be okay with dying, and not everybody's okay with that. It's the same reason that suppression, even though being mathematically worse for your, overall damage taken across a large sample size, worse than spell dodge and always has been, it just got squashed because, it's reliable and calculable. That said, if you're feeling lucky, attack builds that deal elemental damage but not lightning damage. So things like Frostblade to Catabasis, Revo for Fraction, Molten Strike of the Zenith, so on. And I'd probably be playing reverse odds of growing accumulator and then decide how you feel between risk aversion and spectacular parlay. I'm ready to be so wrong about where I have this placed, but I have my reasons. Trust me. Antiquarian is actually one of the coolest ascendancies here. It's a specialist. It's got two real niches, and it wants you to really go all in on them. One is the Ward Quarian, is what I'm calling it. Exhibits 377, 390, and 24 create an insane trio with a tinge of damage to provide support to an archetype that has never really had direct love. Ward, which Ward got an insane buff this league already. Having an ascendancy directly support it is terrifying. And also, I say defensive, but it's worth noting that Night Grip is a pair of gloves that are in fact in the game and could absolutely do some disgusting things with the amount of ward that we're talking about here, as I've been seeing plans with 40k, and I'm pretty sure you could get to 50k or higher ward, and Night Grip would love that shit. I'm just saying. Either way, this niche becomes an insane wall against hits and potentially becomes a ridiculous Valdos farmer, or it just starts nuking things left, right, and center. Or both. Who knows? And niche 2 is a high potential strength stacker. That has a ridiculous downside of having no int. Which, in case you're curious how impactful that actually is, Replica Alberon's Warpath, the strength stacking item, has 47 int as a requirement. So we're banking on not needing items like that, and instead of relying on things such as the internalized percent increased duration per strength, which, while visually just says percent ink duration, it is in fact confirmed to be skill effect duration, so regular duration that you would get for anything else. And I'm not really sure how you would abuse this off the top, but seeing that much duration available usually means that something dumb is going to happen because it's duration. It always causes something dumb. So with two ideas of how this ascendancy could be dumb, the placement really is because I think it's really specific on your building of the character to actually get good value out of the ascendancy. But once they're put together, it's going to be beautiful. The other reason I'm only on okay instead of good is because I'm actually not super certain as far as how the Ward Quarians in particular are going to find their ceiling. Because if you are playing it, I think you should be playing a Ward Quarian. You should be doing things with Night Grip so you actually have offensive presence. And I take all the ward notes. You can also get the adrenaline. And then Lionize Hair. Probably a strong chaos hit character. You could go poison, but I'm thinking hit. Maybe a bow. Maybe just like Cobra Lash. I'm not really sure. But like that's where I'd be thinking. Man. Bog Shaman is so close to being a good ascendancy. It's going to make a fun case study at some point for the channel when I talk about downside design. Because if you ignore its downsides, it has access to stuff like all three of projectile speed, AoE, and duration in one node. or 40% more damage over time, or +5 max all res. But the downsides hurt like crazy, bro. And it's the reason that I can't put it in good. I think the upsides are incredible and archetypally valuable. It's just that the downsides are things that I cannot tell you, yeah, go get that, right? Let me give you some examples. Sanguine Power. Apostate, the chess piece that has literally 0 ES to contribute to its own effect. Imagine you could have that with a chess piece that had 1200 ES instead. Sounds pretty dumb, right? Or Pandemic. That 40% is a lot of damage over time there. You just have to deal with a little bit of degen. You know, Toad Pact, a quote unquote quality of life ascendancy. We all know that AoE, projectile speed, and duration are things used for layering and shotgunning, especially if we're talking about dots, which leads to Toad Pact for things like, you know, TR or Spark or Stormburst, right? There are options here, people. And then you have like Nightblood and Rotten Core, which are extremely strong damage effects from what I was able to quickly gather plugging some numbers around. But their downsides are absurd and freakish and are centralizing to your build. Venom's Drinker, our +5 max res, is a really cool defensive layer, but you need to solve poison first, right? Whether it be through BXCI or putting on Moth Conquest or getting a Watcher's Eye or something in that nature, right? The Ascendancy is just a combination of risky but rewarding Ascendancy nodes that give you a whole puzzle on how to actually extract value from the Ascendancy. And to that end, I present 2 options for you to play if you are actually interested in this Ascendancy. 1, I think you could just play a life stacking caster utilizing Sanguine Power and maybe even Nightblood with, say, like Wrath Pith Globe and just go absolutely ballistic with, say, like, I don't know, 12 to 15,000 life or something, right? It could go crazy. You know, Hex Blast has done this in the past. Ethereal Nice has done this in the past. The life stacking archetype is nowhere near new. So I don't think I need to elaborate too much on how much potential this really has. Or you could look at dot builds, which I'm actually more interested in this personally because I'm a big fan of Pandemic, and Toad Pact has some stats that I think are worth playing around with. For example, I'm interested in revisiting Blight of Contagion on this. If you didn't know, I played Blight of Contagion back on League Start and Affliction League on an Occultist, which I think is worse for this build than Fog Shaman is. And I also think that Affliction was just a harder league to play this build in, quite frankly. So I'm interested to try it here. And with some good money, you can just turn it into Poison Spark and have a great time. You know what I'm saying? That wraps up our okay Ascendancies, which means welcome to the top 10. Well, more specifically, the good Ascendancies. It's entirely coincidence that the top 10 and good started at the same place. But these are the Ascendancies that I actually think are good. And good here really just means that it stands out in its field and excites me about the archetype or builds that it's like supporting. Now, speaking of exciting Ascendancies, coming in at number 10 is Wild Speaker, which I'm going to be so real. I could be wildly underrating this Ascendancy. But it's hard for me to rate it higher because I'm working on the understanding that I think its best build is something that we haven't really seen before. And so I'm a little scared to be like, guys, this is the future. But it could be. A lot of the points from Wild Speaker that I'm willing to give it are just everything feels usable. Like, it's ridiculous to me that Boon of the First Ones is what I consider to be the worst node in the Ascendancy. Because Inspired Learning is an insanely good item, right? But, you know, it's just not Ascendancy quality. And it's the worst part of this entirely kind of strong Ascendancy, realistically. I do need to point out, the first thing in the Ascendancy that caught my eye is Primal Instinct. That node is ridiculous. 2 points for just basically 35% less spell damage, and you don't have to invest points on the tree into suppression. Yeah, that's insane. I also think you might see people utilizing acrobatics through it, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Now, with that out the way, let's talk about the aspects, right? We have aspect of the avian and aspect of the cat. Both aspects are solid. They have no reservation. That will not be shown in the image, but it was confirmed that that is going to be updated in the game. And there's a word where you could even honestly take them both, right? They also have 4-pointers that are generically useful but have interactions that can take them above and beyond. For example, the interaction for aspect of the cat is Feral's Fur, right? You switch phases, you get your charges back, which has done wonders for characters such that with builds like Flicker Strike or Cold Snap with Power. So I could totally see that being insane as a thing that we get in like the 50s and 60s instead of, deep late game on a character. Alternatively, you can give Aspect of the Avian to allies. It also buffs the effect of it, but you can give it to allies. So your ballistas and your minions. I'm just saying, could be pretty good. Then we have to actually look at the minion stuff, which points to that new play pattern that I mentioned earlier, where Scourge of the Wilds is now a way to scale minion damage, but can also just turn Dex into a percent multiplier for your character, which is interesting. So I'm going to keep my eye on that. And then there's also, again, Boon of the First Ones, which is just good, and Great Wolf's Call, which is just good. We love that. Of note, Great Wolf's Call and the Avian section are kind of a support-ish section. Not sure how potent it actually is, but it's just there, and I thought it's cool to point out. And then there's Pack Mentality. My favorite Ascendancy node of this entire event, and will definitely get this Ascendancy called the Awoo Ascendancy. Firstly, these wolves are going to carry your leveling so hard that you could probably just unspec PT when you get to it. Because wolves are dummy strong. We found that out with the enchants on our weapons this league. But more importantly, they provide a really strong buff. Spectral wolves provide flat physical damage to weapon attacks for each one that is active up to 10. And this is a pain point for attack characters in the early game, but especially later on, even it'll be particularly useful. Even when I was testing this off of just ripping a Frostblade's Acadabassus character from PoE Ninja, that was just adding flat cold and not actually converting all their phase at all, it was still an 8 to 10% damage increase with level 10 wolves. And I have to emphasize this because the Ascendancy node gives us level 20 wolves, which are likely to be somewhere around twice as strong buff-wise. And I say likely because we don't actually have the data for that yet. We have 10 and 25 on the wiki, but I could not find data for 20. And also, unlike almost every other source of wolves, we get these wolves on crit instead of on kill. Now, I could go on for a while about this Ascendancy because I'm extremely excited to see what gets done with it, but I'm going to play it safe for now and just be like, yo. And then I'll, bother myself later if playing it safe ends up to burn me because it is absolutely insane. I will be playing this Ascendancy as a minion build or as a physical converting attack build. If you opt for minions, I am a huge fan of Bama. I think Bama is just really consistent, and I think it'd be really cool to see a Bama character finally start from a bow, like the bow side of the tree, instead of crossing the tree to get down there. I think it'd be really cool. Could also try to make Law of the Wilds work, though. If you do that, let me know. And for regular attacks, I'm thinking Frostblade's Acadabassus or Ream of Refraction. And in either case, you kind of just pick the aspect that makes sense for you. Primal Instinct, and then I would be saying Pack Mentality if you are playing an attack build. If you are playing a minion build, the like Bama build, I would be playing with like Great Wolf's Call instead. Y'all ready to cosplay Silk? At number 9, we have Servant of Arakali. In other words, Silk, our favorite man who almost got himself devoured in marriage. This Ascendancy gives me something that I feel like minion players have wanted for a while, which is real dedicated support for poison minions, right? We got a little bit of that with Necromancer in its updates, but it's just not the same as what we have now. A Ascendancy loaded with ways to support poison minion characters and some other uses as well, but mainly for poison minion characters. This evaluation is based on the poison minions, by the way, because I think it's just a significantly stronger archetype than Chaos Hit builds, unfortunately. Now, this Ascendancy provides a lot of early access to stats that usually come at a premium for poison minion characters, right? Namely, chance to poison and access to envy, which that envy is free, by the way. So we love that. Not having to pay the gear taxes associated with these items leaves room for power gains on your gear, or you could even then decide to get your Ascendancy points back and take the points there, right? Like this option is very important for, investment curves. Now, there's a lot that can be said about the general power of this Ascendancy, but I feel like most of what makes this Ascendancy strong, like the spiders and the crit stuff and whatnot, like it kind of speaks for itself. So I'm going to talk about the spiders, just gushing over the fact that you get them in Cruel Lab, because Even though they're unsupportable, they're level 20 on like level 1. So they probably have a real amount of damage. That's 19 levels on a minion. You can do the math on your own, right? They might actually do too much damage if I'm being honest. So be ready for that, right? And also, there's a cool new scaling angle for them opening up with Neurotoxin, allowing you to give them a large base crit with your actual weapon, as well as then, the crit multi that it provides. Now, how I'd play the Ascendancy is I'd probably do Zoo to level and like actually, take Ascendancy nodes accordingly, which Malevolent Strands is really good. If you want the Envy early, I'd probably take Skin Crawler because I want the spiders as soon as possible. Play for spiders, poison minions, transitioning even into Bama, and then who knows where I'd go for there. Maybe it's just Giga Spiders. Like I have spiders in my dagger and spiders from the Ascendancy. Who knows? I think it's really cool. It's exciting. I think you should check it out. Up next, we have a 10 out of 10 in both the naming and theming departments for an alternative version of the Scion, a Scavenger. Number 8 on the list here, right? It's a bit of a difficult ascendancy to evaluate, though, because it's so variable in its value. Think about all of the different effects that we get to choose from, right? Speaking of, the gimmick here is that you will get to choose one effect from 3 different curated pools in the lifetime of the character. One chest unique effect, one weapon unique effect, and one jewelry weapon or unique effect. Which the weapon, there's a caster category and an attack category. Now, I'm not going to cover every single one or every interaction, but I want to, point a couple of them out to you that I've been really like fixated on since I've seen them. First on the list, Fury Valve. Allowing you to wear Marilene's Fallacy on a Parasite Locust Mind's character with Fury Valve sounds kind of dumb. I'm just saying. Or maybe wearing Crystallized Omniscience to equalize our attributes because you're on a Scion and then enabling Leadership's price with the Ascendancy. Or you could do Cloak of Flame with Cloak of Flame and just convert 80% of physical to hit damage into fire. Or you could do Midnight Bargain, which is an insanely strong Zoo Wand that no longer costs you your weapon slot or 30% of your life. There's the Fulcrum for ailment reflection setups. There's Stasis Prison that I think you just need to understand how good that item is. And this is awesome because you'll get to feel how strong Recoup is when you have it in large quantities. And you'll see why Stasis Prison is as rare of an item as it actually is, right? I think this is an insanely awesome and silly ascendancy. And I'm looking so forward to seeing what people come up with when using it. And now, as far as things that I'm going to be looking deeper into, Doomfletch is on there as a list of things that it can use in the weapon slot, and that effect no longer being tied to a terribly statted bow and requiring you to invest in Flat Fizz, which got removed a lot of when they nerfed Herald of Purity. Well, changed, but nerfed for this build in particular. I'm very excited to use it with some other build ideas that I've had, like maybe Reaver Refraction. Okay, look, I'll stop mentioning Reaver Refraction at some point. I just really like the skill, okay? Like, look, it's really cool. All right. Coming in hot at number 7 is what I would say is the strongest of the minion dedicated ascendancies. Even if I actually like Certain Raw Carly more, I think Puppeteer is stronger. And it's mostly because it's more archetypally specific. And the archetypes really need that. For example, I don't really like zombies. I'm still traumatized from the days of Blight League when you have to tell people to despawn their zombies to do a Soulfight rota. But the additional support and quality of life of the playstyle cannot be neglected, right? Which, speaking of, I heard there was a little bit of discontent about the whole thing of like the Baron not stacking with Rotting Might in terms of the strength increases, which is unfortunate. But I'm curious to see if that means that there's a route where you only use one or the other, in which the community will determine is optimal, right? What about animated weapons? Oh yeah, baby. Marioness is such a cool node. And you can pair it with Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection to get some really cool shit going on. I'm a huge fan of this idea. There's Popcorn SRS, getting a little bit of bonus support through Putrid Conscription, which is just a stronger Siege Breaker and makes me wonder if it can be used with Siege Breaker. Definitely helping the leveling experience, but could even give a nice scaling boost to the endgame experience as well, right? Or maybe you're a Bama player who for some reason isn't playing Poison Bama. Let me introduce you to a weird, wacky concept using the Rune Crafting enchant that gives you flat cold damage per ES, and then scaling life and life to ES conversion with Flesh Crafter. give yourself some more damage on your Bama, and Marination plays into that really nicely. While it's less generically strong, I think this Ascendancy is super cool for the specific niches that it provides and offers a lot more in those specific holes. And that's why it's ranked where it is. As far as what I would be playing, it's either the Bama thing or Anime Weapon of Self-Reflection because, yeah, it's about time that anime weapons get some love, you know? We're getting close to the top 5. However, this fine gentleman just could not break through the gatekeeper as he had to atone for his crimes. The Aristocrat, number 6. Why is it number 6? What crimes did it commit, you might be asking? Being weak early. That's the only real weakness I have with this Ascendancy, but I think it's a really big one. We'll go back to that in a second, though. The positives of this Ascendancy definitely land, and the major reason that it's up so high on this list, by the way, omniscience. Just gonna call it what it is for a second. The ability to click 3 nodes of that Ascendancy that say 30% increased attribute of choice is insane because that's just 90% increased omniscience, which is doing some insane things that I've seen at the top end for Omni characters. So beware. It's definitely nuts. And also, I gave it a high rating because it is a generically useful-ish Ascendancy at the top part of its Ascendancy that supports some things that are a little bit more niche, such as like Corrupting Fever, Corrupting Cry, or, you know, like Impending Doom, Decay support, etc. There's just like cool scaling for gem stuff up there that definitely has some powerful niches that someone will figure out something really cool to do with. Now, as far as what I'd recommend to do this on this Ascendancy, it's obviously going to be the Omni character because I think that's just the way to actually play this Ascendancy long term. But if you're trying to start it, I'd probably do like Corrupting Cry or something funny and just go map and make some money and build an Omni character. All right. We've made it to the top 5. Still not actually out of the good category yet, though. You'll understand why when we get there. But at number 5 is our gatekeeper of the top 5, Whisperer. Because I have it in the same bucket as the Aristocrat, but I think its top end is so much more ridiculous. It might be the most broken build of the league, quite frankly. Who knows? I could make a really long analysis and opinion on this, but one, Connor has already done that for me. And 2, more importantly, I just want to point your attention to your mind is destroyed. Giving access to, the Crown of Eyes effect without actually needing that helmet on and asking you to do more than just use wand attacks to do it. While I'm sitting there looking at a character that wants you to scale mana through We Know It All, it's just asking you to put an Indigon on it at the extreme top end of ridiculousness for mana. But before then, you just get to play mana forged arrows. Like basic mana scaling, mana forged arrows, where you get Mind of the Council in Cruel Lab, and then you get Mind of the Council again when you put it on your head. And if somehow, some way, that cake just was not sweet enough, how about fork? Forks are how you eat your cake, so maybe that's good enough. Or maybe even 2 forks. You got 2 hands, you need 2 forks after all, right? The only reason this Ascendancy is at 5 instead of higher up is that I think other Ascendancies are a little easier to get off the ground, or more importantly, are a little bit more flexible. This is a bit of a one-trick pony, but it is going to be an insane one-trick pony. And I'm looking forward to seeing Connor do some nonsense with this Ascendancy. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever asked a question of unstoppable force versus immovable object? Me personally, I'm a fan of unstoppable forces, but this is the immovable object. Coming in at number 4, Ancestral Commander. Let me be extremely clear. This Ascendancy has almost no offensive value unless you are going to meme around with Ancestral Echo. But the reason it's rated at number 4 is that its defensive value is so high. It rivals that of even like a Juggernaut or a Trickster. Because realistically, how do you rate it lower than this when being tanky is just so comfy, so cozy? 3 max endurance charges, baby Defiance of Destiny, a little bit of unstoppable and unbreakable, born under fire, totems taking damage before you. You have so many ways to reduce the damage that you take to really get beefy. And I know so many people really yearn for that experience of just having a character so tanky that they don't get interrupted by the trash that this game throws at us sometimes. But I can't go higher than 4 because I do think the lack of offensive potency does hurt it just a little bit in this discussion. But you can play damn near anything on this, attack or spell, which means probably another lightning strike angle. But look, you're tanky enough that you could definitely experiment a little bit here if you really, really wanted to, right? You've got a lot of wiggle room to put more power into your gear offensively. All right, so we've made it to the top 3. I've sectioned these off into the great category, the equivalent of an S tier, if you will, because I truly believe that these 3 ascendancies are a cut above the rest. Maybe not in every single aspect, right? But overall, holistically, if you will, they are, ability to start well, scaling well, versatility, things like that. They really shine through in these 3 ascendancies. And I think that they just do really well, both generically and in a niche of their own. Bringing up the rear of our top 3 would be Paladin. At number 3, it's a very impressive and generic ascendancy, which, if you think about it, is honestly as boring as the lore behind paladins and other fantasy worlds. Look, sue me. I want a little bit of character with my paladins for once. But boring does not mean weak or ineffective. Let me be very clear. Offensively, it's extremely noteworthy how many different things it does actually have for scaling elemental or attack damage. The one that I'm the most fascinated by is definitely Bring the Battle and its effect, the infinite war cry power, as well as the taunt increased damage taken. But Light of Divinity also provides a good value. Elemental Valiance is literally just the relics from Guardian, so huge fan of that as well. And then defensively, it's not insane, but you have like level 30 auras or anointed champion or field medicine for something weird and niche. Who knows, right? This ascendancy is a nice toolbox ascendancy with a lot of good tools in the box. And so for recommendations of how you can play it, I mean, you can play Lightning Strike. I'm sorry, but you can play Lightning Strike or any other really like lightning attack build or elemental attack build, really. Using like Light of Divinity, Bring the Battle, Elemental Valiance, and either Determination or Grace is my personal pick, at least for a safe pick. I am going to do it if I play it during this event with War Cries and Static Strike. I'm just saying. That's just me. If you're feeling adventurous, you can try and cook it up yourself if you want. Coming in at number 2, we've got this nice star-studded ascendancy that is actually incapable of seeing the stars that it is guiding us towards. Our blind prophet. And I'll be real with you. I think it could be number 1. But I'll tell you why I chose 2 instead of 1 in a moment. First, we need to talk about why I actually think it could have a case for number 1 in the first place. It's got its strengths. And it has those restrictions on its strengths, but man, those strengths are so good, right? Look at Sightless, our 4th starting note that makes you blind, which means that we have to invest a little bit more into accuracy. But 12% base crit, the only comparable effect in an ascendancy currently is the 8% from Slayer. So 12%? So I don't even have to put crit chance on my claw? Yeah. Directionless. It only works with projectile skills, but I think we all know that returning projectiles with no damage penalty on them is kind of dumb. And you might be thinking, oh, it's only 50% of the time instead of Nemesis 100% of the time. This only actually matters for single target purposes if the skill both lacks projectile count and also doesn't actually can shotgun, right? If it's got a good amount of projectiles and does not shotgun, only one of them needs to come back and it will actually, do the double damage thing. So this is also still really strong for a lot of skills. Lightless, which adds more strength to an archetype that I feel like was already way too strong, but I'm not going to complain because I love abyss stacking. So I guess it's more power, right? And I'm not going to go through every node and just name them, but understand that I think that they're all good and worth considering. Literally all of them. And the fact that I consider Restless the pops node of this ascendancy to be the weakest part of it should tell you a lot. And I'm just going to say it. If you think that Formless is worse, you have never played a character with Shade Form before, and you should really change that. Or granted, you could use, Shroud of Lightless, but before then, okay? This ascendancy is the pinnacle of the archetype that it's positioned to be the pinnacle of. And it has a lot of flexibility within being the pinnacle of that particular archetype to branch out into other stuff. That is my argument for it potentially being number one. However, I think I value the speed and comfort of Surfcaster just a little bit higher. And I also think that Blind Prophet is just a little bit longer to come online. Like, really come online. But hey, look, it's still nuts. And how do you play something this nuts? Easy. Lightning strike. Okay, I'm sorry. I will stop mentioning that skill, but it is worth noting that it is kind of just like the safe attack skill that everybody's really familiar with. And there's a lot of information for you to look up on and see how they would, slightly adapt the character to this. And it also makes great use of directionless. But really, it's just pick an attack projectile skill that likes return and does not need to actually like hit the target several times, like explosive arrow, for example. Don't take that skill. So I'm thinking like you could also do Cobra Lash or things like that. Now, directions that I would go with the Ascendancy itself, I think you could either go Abyss stacking or Faithless Postodry Scorn for a funny like chaos hit build could be pretty amusing. I don't think it's stronger than Abyss stacking. I just think it's cooler. You know what I mean? And speaking of cooler, we've reached the top of the mountain, y'all. The cream of the crop. The hype itself. Coming in at number one. The best Ascendancy. Going into the event anyways. Surfcaster. Which is worth noting. I loathe this Ascendancy. And it's mostly just because it killed a lot of my theory crafting hype when I saw it get announced. And I realized that it was just going to gap the field. And now, while I wasn't entirely right about this, because I did just give a ton of praise to Blind Prophet and Paladin for actually being relatively competitive with Surfcaster. But it's not quite there yet. Let's talk about why. It's worth noting that pretty much everything about this Ascendancy stands out. Except for like Brinebound and Sea Legs, I guess, but it's worth noting. Sea Legs has its uses, and Brinebound is actually insanely strong. You just might not have enough points to take Brinebound, if I'm being honest with you. So we kind of just have to, like, what's going on in here? Why is it so strong? One, conversion scaling, I guess it's kind of strong. Maybe, sort of, kind of. And so Stormy Seas, we had this great idea where we should take the effect of Call of the Brotherhoods and put it on an Ascendancy 2 times. And your cold damage shock 2 while we're at it. What? Winterweave? What if it was in your Ascendancy instead of costing you a valuable ring slot? Huh? What about if Call of the Void, we just put that incredible damage increase in DR effect in your Ascendancy as well? Oh, so we just cook it, I guess, right? And that's just a portion of the Ascendancy, right? Just absorbing unique rings that are coveted and powerful into an Ascendancy. Okay. We haven't even touched the Storm's Gift effect being put on the Ascendancy as well. Or, the forced freeze duration from Oath of Winter. Obviously, only 1 second instead of 2 seconds, but still. Or, we could talk about the funny meme that is the fishing rod scaling, which I don't think is necessarily all that good. But there's either going to be a funny meme involving it, or more importantly, quite frankly, there are going to be things that should not be critting that are going to be critting because you're holding a fishing rod, and they're going to do disgusting things. I wouldn't be surprised by this. It's going to be really funny. But I've talked about all of these things about Surfcaster, and I haven't actually hit on why it's at number one for me. The real reason that this is the number one Ascendancy. Not only is it strong, not only is it potent, not only is it unique, but it also has Ghost of the Deep. Ghost of the Deep provides an incredible amount of speed in the early stages of the game that you can keep and build around or change out later for something more powerful. And that's beautiful because it's just that feel good feeling that I always want when I'm playing Path of Exile. Surfcaster, as a whole, as an Ascendancy, is the culmination of years of things that I feel like we as a community have designated feel great about this game. And feeling good is the easiest path to sitting atop the throne. And that's everything. Whew. It was a lot of work. It was actually a lot of fun though to actually like create this. I've always wanted to like run down my thoughts in this way before. And more importantly, I want to know you guys' thoughts on the list, right? Things that you might rate higher or lower, plans that you have with things, especially things that that you feel like I underrated. I would love to know why you think I might have underrated them, right? Other wild ideas that are out there that I should be aware of, and anything else in between, right? Maybe we'll revisit this in in a couple weeks. It'll be like, was I right? Who knows? Um, but also I just need to steal your ideas because maybe I want to play other characters. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. Also, I'll be streaming during this event. When the event starts at 2 p.m. CST on the 20th, that will be over on Twitch. Link is in the description, and you can also go join the Discord while you're down there if you want to ask questions or yap or bother me or whatever else it may be. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.